Hello, everyone, and welcome to the fourth and final program in this series, 50 Objects, Stories of Survival. For those joining us for the first time, my name is Melissa Bailey-Nihei, and I am Program Development Associate at the National Japanese American Historical Society. For those of you who don't know, Ninjas is a nonprofit organization dedicated to the collection, preservation, authentic interpretation, and sharing of historical information about the Japanese American experience for the diverse global community. I'd like now to introduce Nancy Ukai, curator of the 50 Objects Project, who will lead today's program. Nancy?
Hi, Melissa. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us today.
We'd like to introduce the participants in today's program, the Mihara family.
Let's start with the person who's recording. We'll see this morning. We'll be talking about Tokinobu Mihara, who became blind at Heart Mountain in 1944. And blindness did not stop him from leading a full life, being very productive, writing books. And today we'll be focusing on the Braille board that he conceptualized. He invented his own code and had made at the camp. So Sam, would you like to say hello to everybody?
Hello, everyone. Good to see you.
And we also are joined today by Nobu Mihara, who is the eldest of Tokinobu and Sueko's two children. Nobu, would you like to say hi?
Oh, yeah. Well, do I click on my... No?
Just say hi.
Hello.
And then,
well, here's Linda.
Thank you, Nob. And also we have today Linda Mihara, Nob's daughter, coming to us from San Francisco and her shop, Paper Tree. Would you like to say hi, Linda?
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. It's a pleasure and an honor.
And so we'll be starting. Recently, Sam and I recorded an interview with some slides about the Braille board and the family history, and it'll start with David Izu, the art director of 50 Object, a visual introduction that he made. Hello, thank you for joining us today. My name is Nancy Ukai. I'm project director of 50 Objects, and today we will be talking about Mihara's Braille board, object number 19 in our collection of 50 stories about objects from the World War II Japanese American concentration camps. Today, we're honored to speak with Sam Mihara, the son of Tokinobu Mihara, who's here on the left, who lost his sight at Heart Mountain, Wyoming, while he was confined there. Please read our article on the website for more information about the board, because today, since we have Sam, his brother, and his niece today, we're going to take a deeper look at the family history. So, hi, Sam. Thanks so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me. I enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
So, Tokinobu Mihara, who was Sam's father, was born in Western Japan on Shikoku Island. He went from his hometown of Matsuyama in Ehime Prefecture to Tokyo for college. He studied at Waseda University, and he majored in English and minored in Hebrew. At the age of 23, Tokinobu arrived in San Francisco to take a job as a journalist at the New World Sun Daily, or the Shinsekai. Sam, can you tell us about your father's work in journalism in San Francisco?
Well, my father was very well trained at Waseda, his major being in English. And so he was very, very good at both English and in Japanese, of course. So when he started working for the newspaper in San Francisco, he began writing, and he wrote many books, articles, both part of his job at the newspaper as well as on his own writing these books. And I didn't know a lot about the history of the number of books he wrote until recently, and I was frankly quite surprised. I knew about some of them, but it just shows you he had a personal motive, a drive to try to be creative and try to make a written history of things that he likes and he likes to write about.
Well, this article on the front page is actually about the fact that he translated Japanese primary school textbooks into Roman letters, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But he was really passionate about language. So in 1902, Tsunegoro, Tokinobu's father here on the left, arrived alone in San Francisco, and he made his living as a producer of miso. And for 18 years, he sent money back to Japan, and this actually paid for Tokinobu's education. When Tokinobu graduated from Waseda, he came to San Francisco with his mother, Tsune, in 1920. And so the family was reunited after 18 years. Where was this photo taken?
I believe this was at our basement on the old house being in San Francisco on Laguna Street, between Geary and O'Farrell. And I vaguely recall that Grandpa had set up this factory for making miso.
So this photograph was taken around 1940 in San Francisco. And Sam, can you tell us about who's in this photograph?
Sure. Starting from the left, that's Grandpa Tsunegoro, and next to him is my grandmother Tsune. My brother, older brother Nobu, or formal name Nobuo. My mother Sueko, my father holding me, and that's me on the right side.
So you all lived in Japantown. Your father, I understand, had already been diagnosed with glaucoma and was under the care of an ophthalmologist for 17 years, actually.
Yes, I also learned about that time recently, where this ophthalmologist, a specialist who knew how to take care of glaucoma, was able to keep my father from going blind for all that time. And I remember even going into the camp He was wearing some glasses, but he was able to see. And that was a miraculous skill on part of this specialist. And the key point being, once we got to camp, there was no such medical assistance available.
How much as a child, how old were you at the time?
Well, I went in at 9 years old. The picture was taken when I was about 7.
And so your family in 1942, after Roosevelt's exclusion orders, was taken not to Tanforan and Topaz for a San Francisco family, but you were sent to the Pomona Assembly Center in Southern California, and then to Wyoming. And then 2 years later, your father's sight was lost.
Yeah, that was the most difficult part of the transition. First, we had no idea why a group of us went to Pomona, where a lot of our friends, including some of our relatives, went to Tanforan. But that's what happened. And we were there at Pomona for 3 months, and then went on to Hard Mountain.
And then your father lost his vision in 1944. I saw in his WRA file, he had an appointment in Billings, Montana to visit a doctor there. And that doctor told him that he is incurably blind.
Yeah, that's the sad part of it. Why the government waited until he became blind and then sent him to a hospital to tell him you're blind, and not having the ability to go back to his specialist. My opinion is I lay the responsibility on General DeWitt. He's the one who decided that no one of Japanese ancestry shall be allowed back in the district. And knowing that the skill was available, but denying my father the ability to see the specialist, and resulting in his blindness, that is, extremely inhumane. And I feel bitter about that event, and for all the other people who had medical problems who did not have adequate care. That's one of the problems that we had at places like Hard Mountain and the other 9 camps.
So apparently your father was beginning to study English Braille, and he was getting materials from San Francisco. So he was quite practical, industrious. And then he invented his own Braille code and made this this unique learning and teaching tool, this Braille board. It's made of hardwood. There are hundreds, more than 300 tiny little holes which are drilled in. And then there are white pegs which signify all of the Japanese syllables. This is in katakana. He had his own kind of theory of language. He was so interested in Roman letters. But at any rate, he had this made. And at the top, it says, "New style of Japanese Braille, conceived by Tokinobu Mihara." And then he has written down where it was made and the period. And in a book that he wrote, he says the lettering and the carving was done by an Issei, an immigrant man in a different block named Shigeichi Usami. So it's wonderful that we know who he is. He was from Shimane Prefecture and alone. I believe, did you remember him using it or what he might have done with it in the barrack?
I vaguely remember his use of this board, especially when he had some blind students who came to our barrack room, and he was teaching them the use of a Japanese Braille. And so he was very productive in the sense of having something practical like this object, which he was able to use as a tool to help teach. I thought that was quite fascinating.
But 1944 was a very hard year. That's the year that your father in November was diagnosed with being blind. The family house in San Francisco had been broken into and everything was stolen. And on August 6th, your grandfather, Tsunegoro, died of cancer. I mean, just catastrophic year. This is a photo of the funeral. Do you have memories of that, Sam?
Yes, very clear memories when a family member passes away, and as a horrible manner that Grandpa did when he had this cancer. I'll never forget it. And even more difficult is the fact that I looked at his medical records, and I found out they were mistreating him. They weren't giving him the nutrition, at least to try to extend his life. And that's another problem that we had at the camp, is the inadequate medical care, especially for specialty problems. And so it was a very, very sad occasion. I remember this event. This was in a barrack, which is a community barrack, and the funeral taking place. That's me in a white shirt, my father to my left, and Grandma in the veil to my right.
Were you able to say goodbye to your grandfather? Did you visit him in the hospital?
Yes, it brings a very difficult and emotional event. At the last time I saw him and I talked to him, I went to the hospital and I saw him, and he looked awful. He had withered away to skin and bones, malnutrition, and he did something that I will never forget. He said, come close to me. And I went close, and he reached out with his hand and shook my hand. And inside his hand, he had a quarter. And he said, please take this and enjoy what you can. And that was his parting gift to me. I'll never forget that. And, what a sad way to end a life in a desolate place like Hard Mountain. But unfortunately, we hope it'll never, ever happen again to anyone.
This is quite a commemorative photograph.
Yeah, this is the entire group, very, very large. A minor detail, all the flowers you're looking at were made of paper. They were artificial flowers because we had no nursery for flowers, but it did its job. And we had several funerals every month. That's the nature of what happened when you have 10,000 people inside a single camp.
This is an aerial view of the map showing your family barrack at 1422C,
Right.
And the hospital in a circle. And this is the hospital area now and what remains. And actually, that tower is still there. This is a 1940s picture. Did your father use these facilities?
My father, as I recall, was an outpatient, and once in a while, I believe he checked in. But again, I learned later on there were no specialists. There were 3 optometrists who were able to prescribe glasses, but no one who knew about the inner workings of the eye and how to take care of medical problems like glaucoma.
Do you remember eating in the barrack, or do you remember meal times?
Oh, I vaguely remember we still had to eat. I seem to recall there were times we ate in the mess hall as best we could. And when my father went blind, we would guide him into the mess hall. But then there were times when we brought the food back to the room. But it was not easy. Very, very difficult time, especially during the winter. The awful cold snowy winter that we had at Hard Mountain, difficult.
And so in April of 1945, I believe the family moved to Salt Lake City. So they didn't return to San Francisco right away.
Right. I recall my father was very concerned, as well as a lot of people were concerned about returning back to California, San Francisco especially, because of the hatred that still remained at that time. And so my father said, well, it seemed to him that Salt Lake City would be an intermediary location. The people there might be more friendly, and it might be okay. There's a small Japantown. And so he decided that the family will first go to Salt Lake City. And he tried to he did open a store and a combination a bookstore, gift store in the heart of the small Japantown in Salt Lake City.
I have here a cover of the book that he wrote in 1962 called Depending on a White Cane, or The Story of the White Cane, depending on how you translate it. But it's his autobiography.
Yeah, I did not know about this book until later in my life, but I finally got a copy and read it, and it's very, very revealing about the history of his blindness and how he was able to adapt to his new conditions and keep trying as best he could to support the family, as well as different ventures, including writing of several books.
Here on the left, the caption in your father's book said that he was reading a Braille Bible. And there he's with Barney, his guide dog, which he got in San Rafael. And he wrote a book in 1966 about guide dog work in the United States. Was your father religious?
Yes, I learned from checking out his background, his history. He developed an interest in religion back at Waseda. He actually not only studied Christianity, but he also studied the Hebrew language. I remember he would recite these Hebrew passages. I had no idea what he's talking about, but he had a good memory, and he enjoyed doing that. But in the end, he finally chose Christianity as the preferred religion.
And so this is a photo showing a sampling of some of the materials he created, the Braille board, the books he wrote. There's one there with an American flag on it. I believe that's for war brides and how to get citizenship.
Yeah, I remember this activity after we returned back to San Francisco. My father saw a need for teaching English and obtaining citizenship with the war brides after the war. During the occupation, many people may recall the occupation forces. Many of them had married Japanese national, and these women came to San Francisco area or came to the U.S., and those in the San Francisco area wanted to learn English, and they also wanted to become citizens. And so my father saw a need for a book, and I have a copy of it, and it's amazing. I'll guarantee you 99% of the people who are U.S. citizens will fail the exam that my father taught to all of his students, because it's not easy. And so that was a very interesting book that he wrote.
And I just wanted to point out this album at the bottom, because it's a photo album which Nob very kindly shared with me. It was saved, and your father had his own dark room. And when you open up the album, there are photos of flower growers in Northern California. And there are pages and pages of people's property, at work. And we just include a few here with people's names and his really beautiful handwriting. And it strikes me that when you look at how people are smiling and are so open, that they really responded to him as a person. Your father had his own darkroom. What happened to your family photos?
Well, my recollection is it was a very difficult time right after Pearl Harbor. Many families, including ours, decided to destroy any records, any photographs, anything that might implicate that they were conducting something that might be illegal. And as a result, I remember my father was that fireplace we had was burning day and night. He was burning up everything, photographs, films, and so it's not surprising we have relatively few photographs of our family history before the war, because it was completely. Dad decided that it's better not to have that around.
Well, this album was preserved, obviously, and it is very precious. I noticed in the album pages that the Mochida family of Oakland, and they had a nursery in Eden Township, which is now the San Leandro area. He took photographs of them, and this is obviously before the war. And then Dorothea Lange took photographs of them in April of 1942 as they were waiting to be taken away.
Yeah, that is amazing. I'm pretty familiar with Dorothea Lange's photographs, and the connection between the famous one and the one that my father took was extremely interesting.
So, Sam, you've become a national speaker on the Japanese American incarceration. You've spoken at Harvard Law School, Yale, Berkeley, all over the country, to companies, to schools. And viewers will be interested to know that this Dorothea Lange photo taken in San Francisco is of your wife, Helene, when she was a child. You use this in your slideshows to great effect.
Well, thanks to Dorothea Lange, that story wouldn't be around if she didn't take this particular photograph. And yeah, when I give talks, this is usually a hit as to what happened to the girl with the large plaid coat. Yeah, we've been married for 62 years, and it's a fascinating part of our history. If I can also quickly mention, Nancy, anyone who's interested in my talk, please contact me on my website. I'd be happy to accommodate you. I do a lot of Zoom work, and I can give talks all over the country. And my website is www.sammihara.com.
And we'll post that for sure. What made you begin the second career after you retired from being a rocket scientist, Sam?
Well, that's another story. I was enjoying my retirement when one day in 2011, I got a call from Heart Mountain, the people there, and they asked if I could speak, because there was a request from a lawyers' conference on looking for a survivor of the camp. And that was my first speech. It was a amazing event. I found out they knew very little about what happened and why it happened, and the lessons learned. And so I enjoyed doing that, and that was my start. And I've been speaking for some 10 years since then. And this year I'll be crossing the magic number of 60,000 students who heard the story, and hopefully it'll keep on going up. And that's what I do, and I enjoy that.
I was surprised to hear that you had taken it upon yourself to visit immigrant detention centers, federal prisons.
Yeah, that was an interesting byproduct of my past work. I started getting interested in not only the Japanese prisons, but today's problems, and I started visiting several of today's detention centers for undocumented immigrants. I was able to interview several immigrants. I was able to interview people who knows about what's really going on, and I'm still doing that. When the occasion comes up, I will try to do that. And the finding so far is that the conditions today are really bad. The public does not know the inhumane conditions that are going on inside these detention facilities, and there's no question it's got to stop. There has to be a better solution than to build more prisons and lock up immigrants than we have today. It's obvious that you shouldn't lock up children, for example, and that was one of the things I've learned, and I hope to keep up the work.
Well, Sam, only 7 years after that 2011 first speech you gave, the National Council for History Education made its very first award to a Japanese American, and they gave you the Paul A. Gagnon Prize. And so thank you for the work that you do. And I'm just thinking about the legacy of the Mihara family. The Braille board was donated to the Heart Mountain Learning Center in Wyoming. This photograph is of your family home, of course. And I found it fascinating that your parents sold the home to the JACL, which built its national headquarters in its place.
Yeah, that is the original location, 1765 Sutter. And that's where our Victorian house was, with the large gymnasium and the schoolroom on the top. And that's where my father did his teaching.
So about a block away in Japantown on Buchanan Street, the blue shop on the right is the Paper Tree. That's a famous gift and origami store co-owned by your niece and Nobe's daughter, Linda Mihara. And Tokinobu published 2 books, early books on origami, and taught her how to fold when she was only 6 years old. So we're really looking forward to meeting them next and talking about yet another part of the Mihara legacy. So, Sam, thank you so very much.
My pleasure. Thanks for the opportunity, and I enjoyed it, and hope to meet everybody again soon.
Thank you, Sam.
All right. So that concludes the pre-recorded portion of our program. Thank you so much to Sam and Nancy for putting that together and spending that time doing that interview. So first, I'm going to briefly introduce our panelists again before we go into the question and answer portion. But just in case you aren't sure how to ask those questions, including if you think of any more while we're continuing the question and answer, at the very bottom of your screen, there's a chat button. You're going to want to go ahead and click on that and type your questions into the box that comes up. All right, so without further ado, we'll go into the question and answer, and I'm going to introduce our panelists. So first, I'd like to introduce Nobe Mihara. So Nobe Mihara is the eldest son of Tokinobu, and he's joining us from San Francisco. He was 11 years old when he first entered Heart Mountain. So next, I'd like to introduce Nobe's daughter, Linda. Linda is an award-winning origami artist and designer, and also the granddaughter of Tokinobu. So welcome, Linda.
Hi, thank you for having me.
And of course, last but not least, I'd like to formally introduce Sam Mihara, who you heard from during the earlier part of the program today.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. All
right, so we're going to start our question and answer session with Nobe. The Braille board is actually not the only object of significance within your family. And we wanted to hear a little bit more about the cash register. your family brought back from Heart Mountain. Could you tell us a little bit about that? And we have a photo of it here, actually.
Oh, when the camp closed in 45, we moved to Salt Lake City. My dad wanted to open a retail store. And in order to run a store, we needed a cash register. So he put in a bid and acquired this real old-fashioned cash register, which we used in Salt Lake City for 3 or 4 years. It's a 2-wire circuit system. And I didn't know without 3 wires, you can get shocked, which I did. If you touch the register and another metallic item, you got the shock of your life. All the new registers now have 3 wires. And so this is a very dangerous, lethal weapon almost. I'm taking it up to Heart Mountain this summer and donating it. And I think they have a place for it. Something from Camp Days that's still around.
And it came all the way with you, first to Salt Lake and then out to San Francisco, right?
Right. And it worked for a while, but all the new cash registers are electronic. So there was no further need for this.
Wow. So our next question, actually, we wanted to ask a little bit more about your mother, since we heard so much about your father. Do you remember what was her role in running the publishing business after the war? And do you have any memories of her in camp?
I'm sorry, say that question again.
Do you have any memories of your mother in camp and things that she was doing? And then how did she help run the publishing business as well?
She was a good old homemaker, and I can't recall her having a job as other people did. Shall I describe the people on this?
Yes,
picture?
that would be great, actually. So we know that this is your family.
My mom's on the very left. Next to her is sister. Oh, that's Kimi Nobuko. And the other sister, Kimi. And the older sister, Hanaya. And Hanaya's husband to the very right. And there's me and my brother Sam.
So I assume you're the one on the right, correct?
Yeah.
Got it. So we had, let's see. So these next questions, I guess, both Sam and Nob can chime in, actually. So there's actually a lot of questions about your father and how he was. One question is, how was he able to run a bookstore despite being blind?
Well,
I guess after the war.
We all chipped in on that. He had a lot of books from before the war that was stored in San Francisco. We had them shipped to Salt Lake City, and that was the backdrop of the retail store. We sold a lot of books from Japan. We imported, in fact, Japanese magazines, and we wholesaled it across the country. And that was the start of our wholesale business. We eventually moved to San Francisco and continued with that for a while.
And so there was actually a question that came in from the audience about what happened to the original home in San Francisco. Now, you weren't able to return to any of the original property that the family owned. That's correct, right?
We came back to the original building on Sutter Street, an old 3-story Victorian with a basement where we did all our packing for wholesale. Mm-hmm. In the back was a gymnasium, and it was used when the Japanese school was on before the war. And then, well, more recently, we used that as a storehouse for our wholesale operations. Mm-hmm. And that was all torn down through redevelopment. And right now is the JACL National Headquarters building. Now, if you went up to the building today, on the lower right corner of the property is a plaque showing the history of the property, the Japanese school, and finally, there's a hand-drawn picture of the former building. You'll see it there. And Linda remembered every detail of that. If ever you have a chance to go see it, have a look. The curved glass windows, all the facade, the artwork, it's all she remembered and was able to reproduce it. So have a look.
Oh, wow. So actually with that, that was a nice introduction to Linda. So we have a few questions now for Linda. First question is actually, could you speak to how the art of origami fits into your family narrative? And then I know that there's a photo you'd like to share as well.
Yes. So as you mentioned earlier, Grandpa authored two of the first books in English on origami, and which I have here. You showed the first edition, but we have the second edition here too. And what's really interesting about these books is it, of course, was printed actually in Japan, but if you open it up, it's got folded figures of origami that you can actually see that this is what you're going to learn how to do, as well as, you know, the instructions and everything. And in the back had a pack of paper ready to go to fold. And then it says, you know, Oriental Culture Book Company, which was Grandpa's wholesale business, which was run out of the house on Sutter Street. Now, so that's my connection. I started origami when I was 5 or 6. And by the time our family, you know, came to be, Grandpa had already, you know, was blind. And so he never actually taught me how to do origami, but I learned it through the books. And so that was his, you know, and he designed the books because he wanted to do something for the American children. He thought origami was a great vehicle to help share some of the Japanese culture. And so the books were always around the house. And that's how I started, is folding everything from his books. And of course, with my sister, Vicky Mihara, Avery, and my brother, Roger Mihara, I remember days where we would come home from school and we're sitting around the table folding origami. And I remembered sometimes my parents would come in because we were so quiet, we weren't making any noise. What were we doing? And we happened to be sitting around folding origami. So thank you for picking up the picture of my sister, Vicky.
Of course.
Together, we did quite a few things in origami, in particular with the festivals that for the Cherry Blossom Festivals, we started in 1968. And 68 was when we started Paper Tree. That's when my dad opened Paper Tree. So closed the wholesale division, Oriental Culture Book Company. And then we opened Paper Tree, which started in the Japan Center. And so Vicky, the link with Vicky is she was the first one to really produce a DVD on actually a VHS of origami called Crease Relief, which I have here. And in the 90s, she created DVDs on origami how-to. So she really was also had my grandpa's pioneer spirit on helping to introduce origami to the world. And it was great. I'm sad that we lost her to pancreatic cancer in 2019, so recently. But together we would do the origami demonstrations for the Cherry Blossom Festivals. That was since 1968. So we've been doing it we were doing it for 52 years.
And
I continue to do it, actually, just on one note to kind of tie things back. The house on Sutter Street, which is now the Japanese American Citizens League building, for the Cherry Blossom Festivals, we use the facilities on the first floor for the origami demo And so it's when the first year we did that, it was almost like it was coming back home, and we're able to continue sharing origami with everybody at the festivals in that same building, which is amazing.
Well, and you also have been teaching classes regularly yourself. I know this morning you were just teaching a class as well, right?
Yes, I have. I started something called Free Fold Origami Saturdays. It was kind of created during the whole COVID thing in the summer. And so every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock, I get to teach some wonderful, easy origami models. And that class has been growing by the week, which is really amazing.
Oh, wonderful. So this is actually also a fun question that came from the audience. I'm going to shoot it over to you. How did the name of the store come about?
Paper Tree. Let's see. At that time, so it was late 60s. And I remember my dad came up with the name because everything was being called tree at that time. You had nut tree, you had coffee tree, and tree was kind of like a trendy name to be included in with businesses, right, Dad? I think you would agree.
Yeah.
So you said, why not Paper Tree? So that's my recollection of how it got started.
That's great. Well, thank you. So we're going to just move ahead. We're getting tons of questions in. So unfortunately, I'm just going to have to move ahead. But Linda, there are a few questions about that class. So I may be asking you later for more information so I can share it with the audience. So we're going to move actually to Sam now, because there's been a lot of questions about your dad in the Braille board. So we'll start with, let's see. Did your father have a way of writing Braille in camp, and how did he use his Braille system? And did he use his Braille system to write the books?
Well, I recall his initial activity in Braille was to read the Bible, which is in Braille. He ordered it while we were in the camp, and I believe that was the first practical use of Braille by being able to read the Bible, which was in Braille at the time. So he learned English Braille first before he created the Japanese language Braille, then followed by the Braille board itself. Nobe, do you have any other recollections of how Dad started in the Braille activity?
No, I really don't. I recall he spent a lot of time creating that English-Japanese dictionary. He had a couple of secretaries come by, and they were doing the typing as he went through the regular dictionary and did the translation to create that. And I still have a few copies around. It did quite well. And he also produced a Japanese language textbook, and that's been quite good. I have a bunch of those left over, and when people ask about learning Japanese, I just give them a copy of this, and it's very simple and easy to learn. Japanese language is easy because you have only 5 vowels. In English, you have maybe 30 or 40 vowel pronunciations. That's where many people have trouble from Japan trying to learn English. But for Americans to learn Japanese, it's a lot simpler, simply because there's only 5 vowels.
Can I just mention, Melissa and Sam and Nobe and everybody, that actually the Mihara Braille system is historically recorded in Braille history in Japan. And someone named Hiromi Kishi in Kyoto, who works for a Braille History Association, has been keeping a bibliography of Tokinobu's writings in Japanese, which, we who are reading English don't necessarily know about them, but he's at 17 titles, including dictionaries, books about Japanese classical literature, and the textbooks, which he translated into Roman letters, because he thought that Japanese children born in the U.S., Japanese American children would never be able to learn Japanese if they had to learn kanji and kana. So he really believed that Roman letters was the way to go.
That's this book, this
Oh.
dictionary here.
Thanks, Linda.
Yeah. Oh, if I might say, jump in here real quick, because the question was asking about how Grandpa was doing his thing with the Braille. Because we lived on the first floor, and Grandma and Grandpa lived upstairs, and he had an office up there where the secretaries would come, and he would dictate to them, and they would go ahead and type up definitions for the dictionary. And I remembered he had a device that actually punched out Braille. It was a Braille machine, if you will, that would punch out raised dots. And I'm assuming that would be from the English Braille system. And I remembered him using that and thought it was just pretty amazing to see the dots on the paper strip that would come out from that. But I distinctly remember those times where he had that there and the secretaries there and dictating his, or he would dictate to them what they would type up for the dictionary.
So this question actually ties into exactly what you're talking about. Sam or Nob, did your mother learn Braille to be able to assist your father?
No,
I don't recall that. Nob, do you recall Mom
No,
learning
I do
about
not.
Braille?
I don't think she ever touched any of the Braille books. Dad had maybe 50 or 60 different Braille books. They're volumes about 3 or 4 inches thick, and he had a whole library full.
Oh, wow. So there's actually a lot of questions about Braille use in camp. So you explained before, Sam, that your father, it sounds like he essentially taught himself Braille with the Bible. Is that correct?
That's right. And then after he invented the Japanese language version of the Braille, then he would bring in students. I remember this young lady who came in and he taught her how to read the Braille in Japanese at that time.
And so was this during your time at Heart Mountain, or was this after?
No, this is while we were at Heart Mountain. Yeah, right.
Oh, wow.
And in a meeting with the WRA, Tokinobu in November 1940, September 44, said there are 4 or 5 blind people at Heart Mountain, and so I'd like to teach them. And then the 19-year-old young woman he taught that Sam just mentioned, her name is Mae Kumashiro, and she was from Washington State. And so she was his first student, and then he got put on the payroll in the education department at Heart Mountain.
Mm-hmm.
Melissa, I'd like to read a comment by one of the
Please do. Yes.
listeners, and it says from Susan Kitazawa.
Yes.
I am Japanese American, legally blind from a type of glaucoma, which is more common in people of Japanese ancestry. Please be sure to have a full exam every year. And it's a very, very good point. Especially people of Japanese ancestry. You got to be careful and get your exam and make sure that the test for glaucoma is included. Thank you, Susan.
That's fair. I know that it definitely runs in my family as well, being Japanese American. So that's very definitely important to point out. So we're kind of coming to the end of the program, but I wanted to go back to Sam and Nob and actually talk a little bit more about your individual experiences as Nisei. So whichever one of you wants to start. There's
no, go ahead.
No, go ahead. All right. So,
excuse me.
What was it like to go to school at Heart Mountain and then in Salt Lake City and then eventually back in San Francisco? What was that like for you?
Ooh. Well, my experience in Heart Mountain, excuse me, I would say covers 5 areas. First being throughout the 3-year internment time, each family was kept together, not like what's happening down at the border with Mexico. Our family was kept together for 3 years. Same with all the other families. That's number 1. Number 2, we were fed 3 meals a day. Of course, we had to hike to the mess hall, but that's all right. We got our meals, and that was very good for us. Thirdly, there was a hospital and dental facilities, and excuse me. If need be, we could take advantage of their services if anything happened to ourselves. Third, fourth, they built a brand new high school in Heart Mountain, complete with classrooms, a large gymnasium where they had dances, among other things, and there was a wood shop where we were able to make things, and a music room. I was even taught to learn to play a piano. Apparently, I did a good job. Teacher says, "Why don't I start taking lessons?" And I said, "No, that's for sissies. I don't want to do that." I should have, because I would have been another, Andre Previn? One of those guys. Anyway, that was a missed opportunity. Camp life, in the wintertime, they turned the back football field into a large ice skating rink. And there'd be several hundred of us skating around on that football field. It's very good. By the way, the football field did not have any grass on it. It was all dirt. And before every football game, all the classes had to go out and pick pebbles and rocks so there'd be that danger taken away. And the out-of-towner football teams would come in and look at the ground, and they were scared to play on that surface. They're used to playing on grass. Anyway, that was part of life.
Well, thank you, for giving us a little insight onto what it was like in camp. Sam, do you have any reflections as well?
Well, I think it's worthy to mention that the bottom line of all of this activity at all 10 camps was the injustice. The fact that the government would remove us from our homes, place us in a desolate location in a prison camp, surrounded by guards and guard towers, soldiers with weapons. And yet, even under those circumstances, some 800 young Japanese would join the U.S. military from Heart Mountain and serve for this government, the same government that locked us up. And that's the real lesson learned, that it definitely should never happen again to anyone. And I'm really concerned that it could happen to many others, even though it may not happen again to Japanese. I think that's our obligation to make sure that it doesn't get repeated to other people. Thank you. Thank you much.
Thank you so much. So now, unfortunately, despite the mass amount of questions we have, it is about noon. So unfortunately, we will have to close out the program, but thank you everyone in the chat that contributed, and we'll be sure to also get any questions that weren't able to be touched on during the program to the Mihara family, just to do some follow-up. So thank you so much, of course, to Sam, Nob, and Linda. We're so grateful to have you here today. So we're just going to do just a few little short announcements and thank yous.
So thank you so much, Melissa and the Mihara family, for joining us today. I found it incredibly moving to learn more about the Mihara experience at Heart Mountain. And although, number one, recently, Sansei received an English translation of Tokinobu's autobiography, which was published in Japanese. And perhaps that will be something that the family will want to share in the future. That's up to them, of course. But when I was reading it, I was struck, first of all, in Tokinobu's faith, which was really what motivated him and his own strength of character to, invent the Braille system and do what he did to support his family and be productive and serve society. But I'd just like to share one quote I read, which was very moving to me. He said, "There are watchtowers on the four corners of the barbed wires, and armed soldiers watch you from above. Without permission from proper authorities, you cannot take one step outside the barbed wire. My arms and legs were robbed of their freedom, but the government could not restrict my thoughts and my time." So I really felt that he was really balancing his own imprisonment with his desire to continue to have faith and be free. So anyway, today's event is the last of our 4 programs with the National Japanese American Historical Society. Max, I believe you have some slides to show. We want to thank the 4 families who generously shared their time with us: the Hamai family, the Hebe and Lee family, the Ina family, and the Miharas, of course. And we at 50 Objects, me, David Izu, our art director, and the team are so grateful to the folks at Ninja, Roz Tonai, Melissa Bailey Nihei, Max Nihei, and Tim Chen for having this idea and for being such super partners. So as a community, let's all continue to treasure, record, and preserve our objects and stories. And thank you so much. Please stay safe, stay tuned, and thank you. And I'll give it back to Melissa.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you
you all.
so much, everybody.
Appreciate it.
Thank you, Sam,
Thank you
Nova, and
much.
Linda. And we just wanted to do a quick shout out to our sponsors. Thank you to the San Francisco Japantown Foundation, the Henry and Tomoya Takahashi Foundation, National Park Service, and San Francisco Grants for the Arts for your support in this program series. Thank you so much and have a great rest of your day, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
thank
you.
you.
Bye.